Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in this world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, your moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a great webinar on tap today, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you'll be able to access the webinar after the event. We'll be sending out a link that will take you directly to the webinar. And we are taking questions from the audience. So at any time during today's presentation, if you have a question, don't delay. Go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. We'll take probably about 10 minutes or so near the end of the event and go through the audience questions. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Modernize and Simplify IT Operations Management for DevOps Success. Our speaker today is Bob Hodges, who is Solution Architect at IBM Cloud Expert Labs. Thanks, Bob, for joining me today. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. I hope this is going to be fun for all of us. Before we start, I'd just like to go over a little bit. I sometimes think that I have the best job in the world if we take travel out of it. In what I do, I get to meet with Fortune 100 or startup companies and look at where they are in their journey of either adopting cloud, modernizing their IT operations aspects, and working through all of these issues. So I get to work with corporations that have 20, 30, 50 years of IT operations experience that now need to modernize to handle the DevOps and the new velocity, or brand new startups, which are very competent in doing coding, but they've yet to think about how they're going to manage their operations as they move forward. So what we're going to talk about today is some of the aspects of as you begin to adopt, or if you've adopted, how to improve your operational excellence in making sure that anything you develop and put out there is stable, can be managed, and in all cases, we want to make sure that we focus on the end user experience. So as we go through this, that's the focus we're looking on, is with DevOps increasing the velocity, how do we make sure that we, as the operations or the development team, ensure that the applications are manageable and that we're managing them properly? So as we go through, let's talk about, so the first thing is the market drivers. What's causing us to focus on management capabilities right now today? And then enablers and challenges, and believe me, there are a tremendous amount of challenges facing us. Everything from nobody wants to invest within the corporation or the business, to we have to prove every dollar we spend has an ROI and a payback. And then we're going to talk a little bit about proven patterns in operation management. And we use patterns as the old thing of best practices. There is no such thing as a best practice. What works for one organization will never work exactly the same for another one. We have, for example, SEC requirements. We have compliancy requirements. We have data on the premise. We have systems of record in the cloud, systems of engagement on premise, or vice versa. So there's no such thing as a best practice that works everywhere. However, there are always patterns that you can take, choose, and utilize, and moving forward in developing your operational patterns. Okay, and then finally, we're going to talk about questions and answers. So at this point in time, I want to open the floor up when we get there, and I want you to ask anything you can, because believe me, there's no one right way to do it all, and any questions free form and what we can handle, okay? So let's talk a little bit about the bimodal IT requires a new management approach. What we're seeing, and I say from IBM, myself, all of my peers, and even the corporations that I work with, is as cloud adoption continues on and on and on, what we're seeing is a tremendous amount of legacy applications where we have, for example, the traditional web servers going back to a JMS queue or something like that into a back-end database that are now being refactored and moving towards where I want to put, for example, my system of engagement up in the cloud, but my system of record, my business proprietary data, all the things that are proprietary to me that I bet my business on, that stays on premise. There's a couple reasons for that. First of which is this data model has been built over 10, 20, 30 years. It is heavily proprietary. It's a business enabler for me. In other words, if I lost control of it or if somebody was able to get to it, it would be a very bad thing. And at the same time, I have the issue of I may have to keep it on premise just for compliancy requirements. So you can see there, so system of engagements up in the cloud using an agile model. We talk about for the IT projects, and this is where this is really coming forward. I'm working right now, or have worked with large transportation organizations, where they've moved from things like they now have to have applications for mobile phones for travelers that use them. And these travelers want to be able to jump on a mobile app, reschedule a flight, change their seats, do whatever they need to do. They can't wait for the old monolithic two changes every year. They want upgrades to that application two, three times a week, twice a month. And remember, it's a competitive race because if another vendor, such as my competition, is putting out a better app with better features and things like that, then I have to stay at least on par with them and always trying to get ahead of them. Time to go live in the agile model, 2 to 3 months from inception to start, and then things like weekly upgrades. I'll give you one example. Within IBM, we have the IBM Marketplace application, which is made up of 27 different squads, and we do up to 17 different updates on that single application per week. So it's very, very agile and it moves, so the change rate is higher. And the governance is decentralized. If you're familiar with the SRE and the DevOps model, depending upon the blast radius and my quality, as a Scrum leader or the owner of a particular piece of code, I can make the decision to push out a change as long as I know the repercussions of what's going to happen and I have a fallback strategy without going through the formal CAB boards and getting approvals and waiting 2, 3 weeks and things like that. So velocity is extremely fast when you're looking at the agiles. And then tools, cloud native. When I move to a cloud, in most cases, I lose a lot of my capabilities that I was used to having. I can no longer instrument the operating system unless I'm using things like virtual machines hosted in the cloud. When we talk about PaaS and containers and things like that, what I see is I'm looking at things like just basically synthetic transactions. I have things like health check APIs that I can build in my app. I can read log files, bring them back in, and look for error messages that my development team put in there. And then finally, the processes. DevOps is very, very lean. I want to go through and do that. I want to make sure that my DevOps teams are able to handle the load, but no bigger. But when I look at traditional, think about it. Some models and big. How often do you take something like an SEC certified database that's got full conformance and things like that that has to be certified twice a year? You may only do 1 or 2 changes per year. Change rate extremely lower, centralized. This is where we do have the things like full change boards that have to go through and approve everything. We have backout strategies, we have redundancy, and then cloud ready and on premise. We have things like that where I have on premise clouds, but traditionally those are virtualizations such as VMware and others, KVM. But they're slowly, by the way, moving to things like Kubernetes clusters on premise, and so that's beginning to change also. And then the normal processes, ITIL, CMMI, those are still well in place and have to be or are being used to tick mark all the processes that you go through, everything from service level management up to and including full change, operations, etc. So there is a difference in how you manage a hybrid application versus how you manage a full cloud born on the cloud, and we're going to talk about that next. So how do we move from this? If you're just starting your journey, you're just moving from, I have a standard traditional on-premise application, which I manage using ITIL. I've got the traditional help desk features. I'm doing things in the old-fashioned way, and I'm not saying that old-fashioned is bad. ITIL is a very well recognized process, and when it works well. But when I move to cloud, I have a whole different thing in front of me. I have things, like I said, speed and rapidity. I have new ways of monitoring. I still need to accomplish the same goals, but the methods are different. So if you think about this, if I'm on my own premise, how I do SLA management is entirely different than how I would do SLA management when I have a cloud vendor involved, where I have a wide area network vendor. The only thing that I may get from them is availability, not transactions per second, not number of changes that I can push through per day, things like that. So how you do these things changes when you move from there. And then shared responsibility. Once I put that piece of code in the cloud, I'm dependent upon the vendor to take care of certain features and functions. Are they patching the underlying operating system? Are they upgrading the latest and greatest Kubernetes? Are they bringing things like Istio up to the latest rev level to patch something? So these are all the things that you have to begin looking at from a shared responsibility, and how do you take that into account as you manage it? And then information needs to be integrated across both the old and new. And this is something tremendous when it comes into how you build your operational monitoring and capabilities. So take, for example, where I have a system of engagement in the cloud and I'm monitoring it via synthetic transactions and log scraping. And all of a sudden, the number of transactions going through that system of engagement has dropped to zero. Well, A, is it because the application is not working? Is it because the network is no longer, or I'm sorry, the web server is no longer reachable because of a peering arrangement gone bad? If you remember earlier this summer in Tokyo, they had a complete and total outage where a single vendor, I'm not going to mention any names, was unreachable for 18 hours. No single service within that cloud could be reached for 18 hours in the Japan region. So understanding why it went down, where do you need to troubleshoot, and how you troubleshoot and understand what the root cause is huge. And you have to look at how your end-to-end monitoring cycle and stack looks at these things to understand where to go looking at it. And we're going to talk about the reason why in the next slide. Okay. So we talked about enterprise traditional IT as you begin to do this migration, and the roles will be changing. Large enterprise moving to cloud. This is where we have enterprise DevOps team. This is where you begin to adopt DevOps instead of the traditional model, things where you have dev, and then you had testing, and then you have pass it over the wall to a sysadmin who attempt to install it in the middle of the night. That if it failed, they back the change out. The development team would come in the morning, they would turn around and say, okay, we'll try and fix the problem, we'll redeploy. Well, now with DevOps, that doesn't happen. The DevOps teams may be 100% responsible for doing the deployment. So they're in there, they're fully fighting, they're doing the deployment, they're pulling it back in, and if they're doing it right, they're able to correct and maybe fail forward instead of doing a complete and total reversal out and trying and install the next night. But you still need, by the way, things like infrastructure management still comes into play when you have this tradition or transformation where you're moving from. And then the final thing I want to talk about this has to do with site reliability engineering. We're not going to cover a lot of that in today's presentation because this full presentation is about 4.5 hours long in a full day. But site reliability engineering, if you're not aware of it, is a new paradigm taking hold in the industry, put out by Google a number of years ago, and it has taken the industry by storm, if you will. It is becoming a new way of doing operations that's providing tremendous value and benefits to a number of corporations. And the ones that we're working with, a large percentage of them are adopting SRE whole hog. Okay, now moving on. So processes change. So when we talk about traditional IT, if you remember, if you've been with us for as long as I have, which I'm going to say older than dirt, if you will, traditional IT, we had the rigid ITIL processes where I would queue up a change, I would go into the CAD board, I have a full presentation on what would be impacted. The CAD board would make sure that everybody was represented, that everybody was aware of what was going to change, what needed to change, the schedules were done, impact analysis was done, backout strategy was done, et cetera, et cetera. It's very rigid, and that led to the things where you could only do 2 to 3 changes a year just because of the rigidity of the process and the impact and what you had to do. In a cloud-enabled IT, you have automated build, deploy, and VMs and containers. So when you look at things like this, if you're familiar with Jenkins, UCD, and other automated tools, I can do a full build, put all of the information I need in a script, and have my infrastructure provisioned at deploy time, have everything pushed up in there, cause a load balancer to switch over to my new version of the application, and it's seamless, and I can revert back just by reconfiguring the load balancer. So this gives me the ability to do things very, very quickly. But when I get to cloud native IT, now I still have improved this even more, right? I can go through and do things like using containers where I can do rolling upgrades, where I can have the containers update as they go through, where I can do things like A/B testing, canary testing, things like this that enable me to do 100% release cycles automated and also have the capability to roll things back. And then it's predominantly based upon, you see the cap there, what is the blast radius? So to take a hypothetical example, going back to, as I said, the IBM marketplace, if I have someone who's responsible for all the internationalization of the application, so the way the app appears in Japan is in kanji, In Japan, in China, it's something else. They can go out and make a change of an internationalization string, and they know that the blast radius is just, well, I did it wrong, I'm going to revert it, and there's no hits, no runs, no fouls. Now imagine I'm going through and doing something like I'm going to change the pricing algorithm for every product across the globe. Now that has a tremendous blast radius. If that gets screwed up, if you will, as it's deployed, that's something that we definitely want to have a little bit bigger input on how we're going to perform the change, what we need to look at on backing it out, what's our reverse strategy, how do we recover, are we going to do this in a canary type testing where 5% of our users are cut over to the new application, and once we're satisfied that it's working well, we'll cut 10%, 15% on up the line until we get 100%, and then we can recover the old environment and use it for our next development team. So their processes are going to change. And this is something that you really need to look at. No one should go into something like this by saying that I'm going to make a full sweep and change everything at one time. That is the quickest way to lead to failure. You need to look at where is the best business impact for spending your money, what can you do from an ROI perspective, and how can you begin to introduce this such that you have the ability to make changes, fail early, fail fast, but without taking down anything significant, and get your processes built in and baked in such that this is successful. Now, we talk about this, as I said, updates are pushed automatically into the graph, cluster container managers, topology relationships graphs, change records, CMDBs and CMSs, and we're going to talk a little bit about CMDBs and CMS a little further on. The biggest issue that you have in moving from a traditional IT service management type domain and legacy on-premises is that in a cloud environment where containers can be migrated from one machine to the other, virtual machines can be vMotion from one to the other, where I can quiesce certain machines because at night that nobody's using it and an application will be moved over to something lightly loaded. When trouble happens, understanding how to do troubleshooting, where the application is actually residing, and being able to rapidly get to the mean time to identify where the issue is something huge. Okay? Now, along with this, traditional tooling changes. In, shall we say, ITIL and previous iterations, remember we always used to have, here was the help desk. Their job was to triage the initial call, take calls from customers, write up the ticket, get it into the right queue, and make sure that the ticket was managed and properly worked to completion. And we all know what happens with most of those. They go into the wrong queue. It wasn't triaged properly. The issue was sat there and somebody spent too much time troubleshooting that they didn't have the experience or they didn't have a knowledge base to look at it. So all of these things were very, very cumbersome, and they still are in some cases unless you've had a long time to mature these things. So now when we look at cloud native or we're moving to the new paradigms, you're seeing modern chat ops and tools. And this is something that we're seeing, we're proposing, and IBM uses internally, and a lot of our customers are adopting it just for a very simple reason. Not only is it instant collaboration between SMEs, where, for example, an event can create an incident. And once that incident is caused and put into the system, a Slack channel can automatically be created. Anybody that's responsible by looking this up into a database that they're responsible for that is automatically asked to join that particular channel. And once they're in the channel, they can collaborate, which is they can go through and use everything from, Charlie, did you look at this? Susan, have you seen this? Take a screenshot, dump it into the Slack channel. Let me see what the TTL is on the DNS query, up to and including bots. And bots are huge. I don't want to give everybody root access to my database holding proprietary data. But if I gave certain people the ability to request a chat bot to do something like look at and give me the disk status or look and see the number of transactions or what the table space. So utilization of chat bots not only gives you the ability to delegate and federate responsibility, but also allows you to do things like give people controls and commands available to them that they don't have the skills to perform by their own. So doing something like chatbot, trace route, server A to server B, and watching the trace route appear on the screen is much better than having somebody try to do a sysadmin, log into the box, get to root where they can run a trace route, etc., go through and run that and wait for it, and then try and understand whether the results are correct. So the other thing is persistence audit of communication. Having somebody able to come back in the middle of a problem, look at the chat, go through and read through and say, wait a minute, these results at step 15 that you did are abnormal. Let's go back and look at that. So chat is something that's huge. It's taking over, and we're seeing more and more corporations utilizing chat to cut down the amount of time it takes to not only identify the problem, but to introduce the repair. So what does that mean to all of us? So I predominantly, as I said, I've been working IT service management since about 1978, and that will give you some idea how old I am. And I've seen almost every permutation that we have out there of what's going on. When we talk about one example, incident management, okay? When we first started and got into the web, if you remember these things, it turns around is that the paradigm is that people cannot see a web page load within 3 seconds. They will go to your competitor. Well, now the paradigm is that my end user experience is what people measure me by. So if I pick up my mobile phone and I pull up my airline application and I hit show me the seats, and it takes 15 seconds for that seat map to show up, or it takes 12 seconds for that app to open and give me what my ticket is, I get frustrated. It's not fast. I'm not happy. And especially when it starts going south, things like where I have a graceful degradation, things like, for example, I can see my seat reservation, I can get my boarding pass, but oh, by the way, I can't change my seat because that particular feature of the application's down. So end user experience management, or net promoter scores, if you're familiar with that, is huge in the industry and what we're all striving for. We want to make our end users as happy as possible. And that means an app that's fully managed, fully monitored, and is highly available. Whichever way we do that, redundancy, failover, full monitoring, things like that. So we look at it, let's talk about what we have here. So you see at the bottom, we talk about monitor, analyze, plan, and execute. So those are the 4 pillars of this. So number 1 of which is dashboards and reporting. And as we look at that, dashboards are not only across the board, they may be different and unique for each sort of domain that we're in. So as another example, for IBM's Cloud Operations Center, we have 200 canned dashboards that the end users are then able to take and customize, and that's created about 2,000 unique dashboards for the end users based upon their scope, what they look at, what they own. So for example, I could have a dashboard showing me the status of all of the containers within XYZ, but then I can customize it because I'm only interested in Asia Pacific, so my dashboard only shows me the containers in Asia Pacific. So you have dashboards that are specific to not only the users, the roles, the management team, but then you have the break-fix type dashboards where people want to be able to go get down to the low level and look at what they need to do to repair something. Now, the other thing about this is it should not be seen as that you have to build every dashboard. There are vendor-specific toolings. We'll go into that, New Relic, Oracle's platform, things like that. You'll never replace those because they're built for the products themselves, and they're something that you want to have around, but you do need these operational dashboards so people can see where they need to go do troubleshooting. Then the next thing is monitoring and logging. So monitoring, as I said, not only includes what we do today in the traditional IT, CPU, disk, memory, number of transactions per second, network load, bit error rates, things like that, but also logging has now become huge. Not only ability to capture the logs, but the ability to parse the logs, look at error messages that my application developers dump into there, and we'll come back to that in a second about how we do build to manage, but also the ability to look for trends in the logging. So I can go through and say, for example, if a log shows me a simple error message that it cannot connect to LDAP 123, then I can suss out from that particular log entry that I'm having issues either with the network or the LDAP on the far end or my authentication credentials depending upon the log entry. So logging is now huge. Not having log monitoring and management within your domain, and I mean those not only having the volumes on it, looking at it from what's in it, if you will, being able to parse it, look at errors and things like that, but also looking at the cyclical type things. What are the errors showing up? How often are they showing up? What are the cycles? What transpired before? I want to be able to go behind it and past it to look and see was there something that led up to this particular error that I could have caught. Then we have event management. As I said, once something occurs, it turns into events, and then events turn into incidents depending upon the type. So I can have informational events that I will just store in a database, but some events can be turned into incidents. So we have ticketing and trending. So this is where I want to go through and look at not only the tickets themselves, get the data out to where it needs to be, but trending analysis. So this is something that you need to look at, and this is a thing that we'll talk about, and you can look at when you go to our website. Is trending analysis absolutely huge? You need to look at the number one paradigm I can tell you, or number one thing I would ask you to look at is to become a metric-driven business. We meet with a lot of customers, and when they tell us, for example, that of the event streams that are coming in, only 20% are actionable. Now, that doesn't sound like a bad ratio when I'm looking at 100 events, 200 events per month. Only 20% are actionable. But I have some customers that have over 10 million events coming in per month. And think about how do you suss out 10 million events when 80% of those are non-actionable and they're just covering up things that are happening. You're not able to react to the real events. Then we have things like notification. How do I notify people? We talked about chat ops is one way, and that's an absolutely perfect way. But who do I notify? Do I have, for example, authoritative source of data that says that this is a tier 0 application? Every time it's down for more than 60 seconds, I lose $45,000 per minute. Who do I notify? Who do I get on this? Should they drop everything they're doing and react to this? What are the top 10 people? Who's the management team that I need to notify? So understanding the notification process. And then collaboration, as we talked about, chat ops. And then run books. And run books are huge. If you're not utilizing run books today, not only from just a pure knowledge. So give you another example, which is a run book may say that this particular server for SEC requirements, before I can restart it, I must first capture the core to make sure that the reason the server failed was not somebody trying to go through and break into it and cause this failure to try and cover their tracks. So these are the types of things you need to have from a run book: what to do, how to do it, when to call out, and then what to do when it fails. And then finally, collaboration. How do I get this service restored as fast as possible? Okay. So you can see here that we talked about some of the applications in there. So Cloud Console, Dash, Grafana, Kibana, all the things come up there. Runbooks, Runbook Automation, Rundeck, Collaboration, Slack, HipChat, PagerDuty, ANS, Event Management, NOI, ASM, Monitoring. All these things are tools that you probably have in your repertoire in some way, shape, or form, or you've yet to implement them, and these are things that you should start looking at in your journey, because if you don't adopt some sort of pattern or tool, this is going to hurt further down the line. Now, along with that, one of the things that I should have talked about earlier is when we look at this, on average, when we go in and talk to customers, we're seeing anywhere from 6 to 20 plus monitoring tools in place within an environment. And this is huge. I'll be honest with you, I'm working with one customer right now. They have 120 plus different monitoring tools deployed within their environment. None of the events are synchronized. None of the events are brought into a central place. And it's all been done because of shadow IT. That the application owners were so frustrated with their ability to get application visibility that they decided to go out and fund and develop their own application monitoring just so they understood what was happening. You can't let that happen, because imagine if your application goes down and the root cause is something that's not being monitored, or you have, in the case of one customer I'm working with, that single application may provide services to 15 other internal applications. Think of a major database systems with a lot of data on customers where people grab data out of it over MQ. When it goes down, the application team running that system knows that it's down, but they have no way of notifying the 15 customers of that application that they're down and they're the root cause. So we have an additional 15 applications which are saying they're out of service, and they don't know that the root cause was that central app that's gone down. But back on track, if you will, here. Okay. So when we talk about it, incident processing phases, right? And this is a model that you should look at. There's the detection, And that's something that you always want to look at is, how do I detect this? Can I detect this via log monitoring? Can I detect it via static threshold monitoring? Can I detect it via a intelligent monitor that looks for patterns saying that this is out of bounds for this time of day, this transaction volume or lack thereof? I want to reduce them. I want to make sure that I can take any events which are related to each other, such as bounces. If you're familiar with bounce, it's something where, for example, I have a static threshold of 80% disk utilization. It goes to 81. I fire an event. It drops to 79. I fire a clearing. Then it goes right back to 81. I fire another one. So you have bouncing going on. So I want to be able to reduce them. I also want to suppress events that are not useful. So taking an event saying that this server is unreachable, at the same time getting 5 events at the same time telling me that they cannot reach the server from different components, I want to suppress those events. And then correlation. Correlating events is the absolute nirvana of getting to where you want to be. Because if I can understand what is the root cause, what caused this, so if I have a single router that goes down, and behind that router are 50 business critical servers. I do not have a redundant path into it. I have no way to get to them. And all of a sudden 50 of my business critical servers are orphaned. Then I can correlate that event saying the 50 applications that have just gone out of service, the root cause is the router. Do not waste time going out and putting people on, troubleshooting those 50 servers. Let's get the network team involved. And for you network engineers on the line, I came up through there, so I'm not picking on network as we usually do, but we want to make sure that we focus on the problem. So identify the cause, act upon it, and then here's the big thing, which is going back and automate as much as possible. This is a tenet in SRE, but it's a tenet for almost any of us in operations in any way, shape, or form. Anything that happens over and over and over again, we either need to identify as a problem and come up with a fix, and that fix can be patching something, providing an alternate path route, putting a new interface in, getting a piece of hardware, firmware patch so that it's more stable. But in lieu of that, we should be able to automate recovery. So if that means going out, for example, and restarting a JVM when it goes through and it hits a memory limit or the heap size or something like that, then let's do it. Let's automate it and make sure that we can go through and recover as fast as possible. So going a little bit further down on that, foundational capability, successful transformation. So what do you need? When you start on this journey, we all say, hey, I have zero budget. I have very little, shall we say, willingness to change within my infrastructure, but I also have a mandate from my executive saying that I need to improve what I'm doing. I need to either reduce my cost, I need to improve my availability, I need to improve my mean time to repair, something like that. So how do you get to here? So first of which is we're going to look at is number one of which, dashboards. So line of business and DevOps teams, they need their own dashboards they're looking at. Then central IT operations and infrastructure, they're going to need their own set of dashboards. The two may be very, very close. They could be on the same platform, but they have different views. Then we have intelligent operations, machine learning, operation management, collaboration automation. We're going to go through those a little bit detail now. So let's talk about operations management. So event correlation, huge. As I said earlier, and I'm sure you're aware of it, how you do event correlation, though, is not trivial. Understanding the topology and relationship between entities, understanding what happens when X transpires, what happens when I know, for example, that a JVM dying is hosting an ear file, which is running on a machine and an operating system, but that machine and operating system are healthy, but that JVM just died, so I need to know, for example, that that JVM hosted that ear file, which is providing X service. So having the topology information is huge, and how you get to it is non-trivial, and it's a full subject onto its own. Then we have policies on everything, as I said, from automation, what you can do, what is the policy for this particular application. For example, if I lose file and print services at the same time that I have a online trading application that goes down, guess which one I'm going to focus on? Then we have integration and infrastructure management. Those all need to be blended together. And then, of course, correlation comes into this at every step of the way. Okay, then dashboards. Intelligent operations and machine learning. Now, this has gotten a little bit of, shall we say, bad press inside this because everybody thinks that machine learning and AI and things like that are the end all to be all. No, they're not. They it can help, they will help, and they do help if you put them in right. But you have to understand that anything needs time to train and learn your environment. So going in, letting loose a machine to say, look at my event stream for the next 30 days and tell me where you begin to see patterns. For example, that 10 minutes before this application crashes, there's always 100% utilization of a particular network segment, and going back and ferreting out that that's caused by somebody running a backup at an inopportune time. That's where you get into the learning. But asking it to do that on day zero is not something that you're going to be happy with the results. But as that model gets built and you begin to make changes to the environment, you have to keep letting the model refresh itself, learn more and more. But as you move forward in time on this and you begin to look at these massive amounts of data, think about all the logs. The one customer I'm working with right now has 43,000 different distributed servers and 40,000 network devices. Yes, I know it sounds like it's abnormal, but that's a real number. So they have all of this information coming in, the syslogs coming in, the application logs coming in. There's not a human being alive that can go through and sort through that data and begin to make any sort of headway into understanding what's going on. But with analytics and machine learning, they're beginning to see patterns in the environment that they've already begun taking actions against and having some success. And then finally, let's talk about dynamic topology. We talked about this a little bit earlier. With the old infrastructure where I could go through and run something like a scanner that went through and said, I found these machines, they're related to this machine, they're physically connected this way. When you look at things like a cloud environment, especially if it's on-premise cloud, you're probably not going to be able to do this up in a vendor's cloud. But when you're looking at this, as I said earlier, you have things like where the application can move from one to the other. Replica sets can grow. So where I used to have 5 instances, now I have 20 instances of this application running. They may be moved from one pod to the other as they do things. So we have particular things with you look at cloud that you have to be cognizant of and understand how you're going to get the data out of there. So when you have to go in and do the meantime or find out the problem, get your MTTR down, you have to understand the topology. So, and then finally, collaboration and automation. And this is probably one I will keep beating up over and over. If you're like me, you've been doing this for a number of years, and I still see it in the industry today. It almost makes me want to cry when I go in and hear that when you have a major outage, that there's 27 people that jump on a conference bridge and stay there for 8 hours until the problem is resolved. And probably of that, 80% of the people on that phone never say a word for the 8 hours. They're just sitting there waiting for somebody to say, is it in your domain? Is it your problem? When actually it's not there, but I'm forced by the corporation's operational procedures to stay on that conference bridge. This is not the right way to do it. Think of the lost labor. Think of the things that the people could be doing. So having collaboration, chat ops, notification, run books, the things that could be done to repair this. This is a huge investment, but it has tremendous paybacks on what you can do, especially when you start adding bots into the mix. So let's go through a real quick scenario. So we've got something like collaborative operation notifications. So we've got incidents, policies coming in. We see it. The notification goes out. It goes to the operator, goes to the app owner. The app owner says my app is unresponsive. The operator is saying I'm getting a coffee. But we see what's going on there comes through. Then what we see is that all of a sudden the app owner and the senior operator looks like Brock is on it, and oops, the senior operator is beginning to look at it. So now he's using the chat ops, the SMS, or the page going through. He's instantly notified and he's engaged and he's working the problem the way he should be. Also, he can update without having to do the traditional get on the phone and call back and every 10 minutes to give status. Then we've got what's going on. So again, we talk about, for example, Slack and HipChat, where I can get into a particular chat. I'm invited to it if we do this right. When the incident's open, I'm designated as one of the leads in this particular domain. Usually it's a group, so it could be me or my peer, whoever's on call. I instantly join the chat channel. I start looking at things that are going on. other people are testing their own domain, I can run a chat bot to say, hey, do a trace route from X to Z, give me a status on the temp space, what does var look like, all of these things that make it easy for me. Instead of having to shell out and run into 20 different applications to do this, I can do it all from one domain with the peers watching and understanding and making suggestions and saying, wait a minute, you missed something. Then we can go to run the rollback. So we look at runbacks. So we can do things like where I can say that in this particular scenario, it says that the correct way to solve this problem is to roll it back. We just instigated a change. This change was bad. It's doing something. We want to roll it back. We've got a run book that says how to do that. And then finally, we can go through and say, hey, from the application owner's perspective, now the app is done, it's resolved, and we're ready to go through and look and see what happened. We can go through and do a post-mortem. So from a problem aspect, once we've got this incident closed, we can go back and do not only what was the problem, so we do traditional ITIL problem assessment, what transpired, why didn't the change go through properly, what happened, what did we miss, was it a code issue, was it human error, was we didn't pre-stage something, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, we want to look at and do a post-mortem. What did we learn from this so we can publish internally and make sure that no other group runs to this and runs into the same problem? So we take the knowledge that we learned and we break it back in and we put it back in. Okay? And then finally, I'll automate this. So remember we talked about earlier, which is whether you're SRE or whether you're a traditional ITIL operations team, I want to automate as much as possible. It's not that I'm trying to put myself out of a job, but I wouldn't mind that. But it is that I want to be able to sit in a hammock instead of pulling my hair out at 3 a.m. in the morning. So if I can automate something, and these are the simple things. So for example, if temp space is beginning to fill up, write a script or something that automatically runs out and says any file older than 3 days in temp, delete it if it meets this criteria. Do something, for example, where I can say, if it does this, then do that. So automation is huge in this, and it should be a paradigm that you're looking at every step of the way. What can I do to improve this? Because every time a human being has to react and get in there, I'm wasting time. And then finally, automation, incident, run app check, run rollback, and resolve. So that's the goal. This is where you want to get to, is that 90+% of everything you're doing out there, you want to have automated to the extent possible. So this is a journey, as I said, when we started this thing. Everybody's on a different, shall we say, section of this journey. You could just be starting out. You're trying to understand how I can break apart my monolithic traditional ITIL, incident, problem, help desk, sysadmins, development team, throw over the wall, completely siloed, to now I'm going to do true DevOps, where I have a DevOps team that sits there and is responsible, and I'm going to do pushes into production. I'm going to have infrastructure built as part of this. I'm going to adopt SRE, where I have infrastructure SREs and I have operations SREs and I have application SREs that work together to form guilds so that I can fully look at my environment and do as much automation as possible and cut down everything. Wherever you are in the journey, I'm going to give you one piece of advice, if you will, which is it's not trivial to undertake this. It's not hard, but what you need is three things. Number one, you need to be willing to change your culture. There are a lot of fiefdoms that have been built up over the years that happen, which is I am very well aware that I've been doing it this way for 10 years and I've got 99.8% availability and I'm not going to change. Well, that's fine, but it will not work when you get into something where I'm in a true DevOps process and methodology where I'm pushing 5 or 6 changes per week. And I don't have the time to go through the rigid controls and CAB boards and change requests and things like that. I need to be able to take everything under my domain and my control, understand my blast radius and my capabilities to push that out. So I'll tell you the first thing is to make sure that you're willing to undertake and take on the culture, because there's great benefit. Second of which is you need the sponsorship. You need to have somebody that's willing to work with you and clear out the roadblocks and make this happen. But you have to, and the final thing is you have to give them the business case. Going in and saying that you want to do this just because it's the latest industry trend, or I read about it in a magazine, or Somebody said that Google's doing this as the next best thing. It's the wrong thing to look at. Go back and look at your metrics. Understand what are the drivers you have today. So, for example, one customer that I'm looking at, 80% of their incidents, 80% of their incidents were caused by changes. So anytime they touch the environment, 80% of their outages were caused by changes. So understanding how to go through and build that sort of data that says, if I did this, if I automated this, if I adopted a new operational model, if I had full DevOps with automation, et cetera, if I use canary testing, A/B, whatever you want to call it, I can reduce the number of outages caused by changes by 60% and then prove it. Those are the types of things that will help you be successful in moving this forward within your corporation and being successful in adopting it. So with that, I think I've reached a nice segue for the end. I believe so. And there's additional sources of information. So one of the things we talked about here is in cloud service management and operations is something that IBM's coined the term of, which is as you begin to adopt and move from a traditional legacy on-premise into hybrid and or pure cloud, how you do operations, both from monitoring, management, operations, chat ops, all of the new trends that are coming along. It's a good read. Go up there, take a look. There's a number of different presentations and decks, and there's the one that I told you. It's about 4.5 hours you can pull down and look through. It's great reading. And then we have Cloud IT Operation Management, Cloud Application Management with another product, Cloud Event Management, and IBM Cloud Private, which is our own cloud, private cloud for your premise, or it can be run actually on other clouds, AWS, IBM, etc. So take a look. Look and see what's out there. Look and see what sort of models you want to adopt. And then take a small project on it. Like I said, I don't know where you are in your journey, but if you've started, take a look at what other people have done as far as patterns for success and see whether you can adopt one of those or change it slightly to help you in your journey. There's no sense in any of us reinventing the wheel. That's why we have conferences like this DevOps we're doing today and others. So make use of what you can, and we're more than happy to help. If you just want to reach out, send an email, we'll respond in an instant. So thank you so much, and I think I'm ready for questions.
All right, great. So we've gotten some questions in so far, but there's plenty of time. If you guys have any questions for Bob, go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll go ahead and dive right on into the questions. The first one, what is the first thing a business could do if they wanted to consider adopting and scaling up resources for site reliability engineering?
Can you say that again, please? You broke up at
Sure,
the end.
sure. Okay, what is the first thing a business could do if they wanted to consider adopting and skilling up resources for site reliability engineering?
That's a great question. It boils down to this, which is understanding what SRE operational model that you want to adopt. So there's a number, which is the SRE comes from a central pool. They can be pulled back in. They're given out. They maintain the central skills and the partnership, the guilds and capabilities, but they're actually attached to a particular application, so they gain the knowledge of the application. They act as a peer member of the the development team. But what I would say, first off of which is understand what the the SRE's role is. They are not a substitute as a developer. They are there for the predominance of making sure that the applications that go out are stable, manageable. They focus on operational excellence, and they work with their other peers, such as the infrastructure SREs and the rest, to come up with a operational platform across the enterprise that gives you exactly what you want, which is a highly available piece of infrastructure and applications and code. Did that help?
All right. All right, all right. So let's move on to the next question then. Machine learning for logs. What engine or framework are you using or do you recommend?
There are hundreds of them. We
Yeah.
have, yeah. So as to what, so inside some of our particular products within IBM, we have our own machine learning algorithms. I can look them up and get you the exact ones. We have Watson, which does a learning. So those are ones that I'm predominantly familiar with, but there's other tools out there. For example, App Dynamics and others, they have their own machine learning algorithms, so it's pretty much specific. But an AI engine to be able to ingest this and beginning looking for it, I think any engine that you could find that's able to take a data set that you could produce and feed into it is going to begin to find the patterns that you're looking for. But the only pre-canned ones I know of are the Watson ones that we have, and unfortunately, like I said, I work for IBM, so that's the one I'm most familiar with. And some of our tools have AI built into it, and they do cognitive learning on what's going through the products, such as NOI and things like that, and they will build models as data goes through. Hopefully that helped.
Okay, great. As I said, there's still plenty of time. If you have a question for Bob, go ahead and submit it. We have a few minutes left for questions. The next question, what are the most common tools in use today for building up high quality run books?
Ooh, that's a very good one. Let's see, for building them out or for utilizing them?
It just says for building up high quality run books.
Okay. So the ones that we have here, these are the two predominant ones in the industry, right? Is RunDeck and IBM's Runbook Automation. Those appear to be the top tier ones right now, and those are something that I'd ask you to take a look at and investigate. They're very good tools. They're very good products. Not promoting one above the other, but look at what your needs are. As you said, how do I get data in? How do I keep it updated? So this is something to be very well aware of. I've released 1.2 of my application. I'm now about to release 1.3 of my application. How do I update the run books? Well, that should be part of your build process, such that all the documentation goes along with it should be released at the same time as you do a release of the application, and then you push it into your run book tool.
All right, great. Next question. Of all the concepts you've talked about today, what would be the best place to start?
The best place to start for me has always been is become a metric driven business. Understand what is the pain point, what is the number one thing that you can address, and then back into what do you need to do. So I'm going to take that example I talked about, where I have a customer with 10 million events per month and only 20% are actionable. So if I could take a tool, which we are doing, by the way, that goes through and says of the 80%, so that's 8 million events per month, which are non-actionable. So the ability to have a tool that goes through, strips out those events, goes through and quiesces the monitors which are causing them, has already shown a benefit to the customer that now they are reacting. Their mean time to identification has improved by 33%. So 1/3. So they're getting where they used to take them 7 hours to get to the root cause of an incident. They're now getting into it in a little over 5 hours. And that's a huge improvement when you're talking about outages of the scope and scale. So the net is go through and look at what is your predominant issue you're facing right now. What is driving you nuts? Is it changes are causing incidents? Is it you don't have the skills? Is it mean time to identification? Is it mean time to repair? You don't have redundancy. You're not using A/B testing for your cutovers. Go back and look at it. Look at your metrics, and that will help you understand where you need to invest and start your journey.
All right, great. Just another call out for questions. If you have a question for Bob, go ahead and use the control panel. We still have a few minutes left. Next question, how do you know when you've reached maturity in adopting this new model of operations? What are the primary KPIs that can show the value?
Great question, and the answer is you never reach maturity. You're always once you hit what you think is stable. Now you're in continuous improvement. You will always find something new that can be automated. You will always find a new venue that needs to be attacked. Remember, we go back and look at the metrics and say, gee, my mean time to repairs climbed by 2% this month because I deployed 3 new applications. You will get to a steady state where there is very little that you can do for improvement, but you're never stopped. You're always looking at what can I improve, how do I do it, and technology is going to change underneath you. If you remember 2.5 years ago, everything was looking at, we were looking at things like clouds and VMware, and then we're moving into Kubernetes and things like that. So you're going to have a hard enough time staying up with the technology that you're going to be working nonstop to just keep your environment improved.
All right, great. That comes to the end of the questions that we have. I'll give the audience another minute or so. If they have any last minute questions they want to go ahead and submit, that'd be great. While we're waiting, I do want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, you will be able to access it on demand. So this afternoon, anybody who registered for the webinar will be receiving an email that contains a link to the webinar that they can access it on demand. And it looks like that is going to be the end of the questions. So Bob, thank you very much for answering them, and thank you to everybody who did submit questions. As I said before, the webinar has been recorded, and you'll be able to access it on demand through the link in your email, but the webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website. So you can always go there, just click on the webinars tab, look under on demand, and it should be right there. While you're there, take a look at some of the other webinars that we have both upcoming and on demand. Hopefully there'll be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 that pique your interest. Bob Hodges, thank you so much for taking the time and giving such a great presentation today. Lots of useful information, and so I'm sure the audience got a lot out of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank everybody who joined.
Great, great. So this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.